Judging by the explosion of objective-based shooters that have burst onto the scene in the last year or so, I'd say we're finally fully transitioned into a new era of multiplayer shooters, separate from the every person for themselves school of design used in games like Call of Duty. Which is not to criticize that type of design. It's not bad, it's just out of fashion. But other than Team Fortress 2, were there any games from the previous generation that really tried to push more objective-focused team play in multiplayer shooters? Well, I can certainly think of one. Hi everyone, long time no talk. Before we get into the video, I have a very brief update. So, for anyone who voted in my recent poll for future games I'd look at on this channel, I figured I'd let you know that The Witcher 3 won. Demon's Souls eventually tied with it, but since Witcher 3 got there first, it comes first. I'll look at doing Demon's Souls after that. I've been playing Witcher 3 whenever I can find the time, so expect a video on it within the next month or two. It's not exactly a small game. So on to the subject at hand. After playing so much of games like Overwatch and Paladins, as well as seeing games like Lawbreakers, Quake Champions, and even Star Wars Battlefront 2, doubling up on the class-based, objective-focused approach to multiplayer shooters, I'd started to wonder how many games I'd played in the past that tried to do the same thing. Obviously, Team Fortress 2 was at the top of that list, often considered the progenitor of the modern hero shooter formula. Other than that, I was struggling to think of what else there was. And then I saw it. Brink, for those that don't remember, was a big deal in shooters back in 2010 and 2011. Until it actually released, that is. Hype for Brink as a Call of Duty killer was enormous, but the game died fairly quickly after it actually came out. Brink was supposed to change the industry. It was supposed to be something new and fresh for everyone to enjoy. Was it, though? And why didn't it end up making the splash that it was trying for? Well, the problem is, Brink couldn't commit. For all of the forward-thinking choices Brink made, it was still beholden to current shooter trends, which ultimately killed it. So how is Brink structured then? Well, similar to something like Overwatch, Brink is a class-based objective shooter, where teams genuinely cannot succeed without employing teamwork as a core of their playstyle. Brink breaks itself down to more or less 8 levels with 2 teams, Arc Security and the Resistance. Both teams are the same mechanically, other than their objective sets. You see, Brink tried to do what Titanfall did years later, in creating a multiplayer shooter that presented itself more like a single-player story. Each level is part of this story, about a failed utopian society trying to hash out how to handle their future. So if the Resistance is trying to launch a missile into Arc Security headquarters, their goals will relate to that, while Arc Security's goals will instead be focused on stopping the Resistance. There is no reverse version of this level, where Arc Security tries to launch the missile, because all of this is just set dressing for the gameplay. Gameplay breaks itself down into 4 classes of character, and 3 body types. Body types dictate your health, speed, and ability to parkour, which was a big thing in this game. The SMART system, which stands for Smooth Movement Across Rough Terrain, essentially offered a light version of Assassin's Creed's parkour mechanics, but in first person. Think of it like a more automated and less complex Mirror's Edge. Obviously, larger bodies have lots of health, can wield heavy guns, but they're slow and can't really do much parkour. Medium bodies are in between, and light bodies can run fast, mantle really effectively, and can even jump off of walls, but are built like wet cardboard. Classes in Brink are rather traditional, and even take from Team Fortress 2 to a pretty large degree. Soldiers are the more offense-based class. They focus on enemy suppression and objective destruction. So, soldiers can place bombs to blow things like walls up. Medics are next, and they're about what you'd expect. They can heal people, revive them after they're downed, and also maintain the health of escort targets. Engineers are also pretty self-explanatory. They build turrets, and they fix mechanical objectives when needed. They can also do things like place mines or buff the guns of allies, but we'll get to that in a second. Finally, operatives are the spies of Brink. They can hack things, including objectives and enemy turrets, as well as disguise themselves as the enemy. What makes the classes in Brink interesting is how intertwined they are. Soldiers have the ability to give their allies full ammo, medics being able to boost the recharge rate of health for allies. As I said before, engineers can boost ally damage, and spies can do things like place firewalls on captured command posts, making them more difficult for the enemy to take. As far as objectives go, Brink offers pretty much everything you'd expect from an objective-based shooter. Hack terminals, escort targets or payloads, defend bases, rebuild structures, and even pseudo-point capturing is accounted for, though it's never directly the objective. Most abilities are on a sort of cooldown, where you have a meter that charges over time, and as long as you have enough meter, you can use any one of your abilities. The game also offers many different perks that can further refine your character. It's difficult to overstate how future-thinking Brink was in this regard. It really does feel just like a prototype hero shooter like Overwatch. Unfortunately, it was held back by the time that it was released in, which ultimately led to its downfall. There are really two big issues from the era it released in, which crippled Brink as soon as it was released. Well, two and a half. The half problem was down to the game kind of being bloated. In order to compete with the progression systems in games like Call of Duty, Brink has a ton of guns that can be unlocked, all of which are just kind of similar to the point of redundancy. You've effectively just got a ton of real-world assault rifles, SMGs, pistols, etc., which don't offer much in terms of variety, nor do they force classes to play drastically differently. Sure, heavy characters can use things like LMGs, but that's not really different mechanically from the medium characters using assault rifles, or the light characters using SMGs, and since any class can use any weight style, that means any class can use any weapon. It's interesting in theory to be able to have a tanky but slow healer, but it doesn't actually lead to anything meaningful in-game, particularly because abilities are more toggle-based than gradual. You either have a turret out, or you don't. You've taken a disguise, or you haven't. You've fully healed a teammate, or you haven't healed them at all. You can't stick to a soldier and provide constant gradual healing or damage buffs. So even though teamwork is required overall, it's not required in the moment-to-moment gameplay necessarily. And this bleeds into class builds in general. Also, perks are permanent when unlocked, meaning there's no interesting pre-match theory crafting. An engineer who has played for 20 hours will just have a better engineer than the one that's just started, because they never have to sacrifice one perk to equip another. But this is small fry stuff compared to the big problems. The two problems which were really brought on by expectations of the industry at the time. Let me ask, is anyone actually upset that Overwatch doesn't have a story mode to play through in single player? Or are we okay with it being a multiplayer-only game? Multiplayer-only games aren't anything new. Even 20 years ago, we would sometimes get games that feigned having a single player, but were really entirely multiplayer-focused, like Tride's Aerial Assault for the PS2. Aerial Assault had single-player missions, but there wasn't really much to it, because they were primarily just multiplayer bot matches. Around 2008 to 2013, the industry was super sensitive to this, to the point that we would destroy games for lacking single-player content. Brink lacks single-player content. There are some training missions to teach you how to play, and you can play multiplayer bot matches in each of the maps. But these matches are identical to what you'd play online, because they were designed for online. Brink got a ton of flack for this in 2011. Though the game eventually went on to sell around 2.5 million copies, a large part of the gaming community refused to support it for this reason. And if you can't get gamer support, your game is doomed from the start, no matter how good it otherwise is. The other major problem, though, is one that might not be apparent at first, and yet has just as large of an effect on the game as a whole. Brink couldn't keep itself from following trends for fear of being judged as inferior before even given the chance to succeed. And the worst trend it could have followed? Having large player counts. Many people might not remember this anymore, but back during that time, having a huge player count for online games was likely to automatically mean players treated your game with more respect than other similar games with smaller player counts. It didn't matter how this affected the game balance, people just wanted bigger multiplayer at any cost. It's why Call of Duty introduced Ground War, and why Call of Duty Ghosts made matches bigger in general. It's why games like MAG got attention for having like 256 player matches or something like that. It's why Battlefield 3 got constant praise and was compared to Call of Duty as a direct competitor, despite the sales of Battlefield never ever even getting close to those of Call of Duty. Brink's teams are too big. Each team consists of 8 players, meaning the whole match includes 16 people. The first problem with this is that Brink's maps don't accommodate for this well. The maps are often even more cramped and claustrophobic than the more constricting maps in games like Overwatch. And yet, again, matches have 4 more players in them than Overwatch matches. 16 players is more than Call of Duty had at the time in every mode but Ground War, with smaller maps. Since the game only has 4 classes, this meant that you effectively had enough players to double up on every class. People expected Brink to have bigger player counts, and so that's what they did. But it didn't mesh well with the rest of the game. Respawn times are a bit too short for that many players, and it has a squad respawn system where everyone who's dead respawns at once. So you could potentially die, find the squad timer at 1 second, and then respawn basically instantly with 4 of your other teammates or more. Compound this with medics being able to offer revival shots to downed players, which fully heals them, gives them about 1.5 seconds of invulnerability after being revived, medics being able to throw as few as 4 of these at a time or as many as like 6 of them, and the super high damage resistance of a downed player making it difficult for your opponent to kill you once you've been down, and you've got a huge problem. The issue all of this causes is that it's extremely rare that you're not being overrun with enemies. Sure, your enemies are being overrun too, but it makes it impossible to keep track of everything. And it only gets worse since many of the objectives revolve around asking 1 or more of your players to stand around defenseless while they hack or repair something. Being expected to spend up to a minute or more hacking something is ludicrous when you realize that the whole minute is going to consist of you being the primary target of an 8-person team. Meanwhile, because you can't defend yourself, your team is at a disadvantage. They're basically missing players. And again, it's not like other teammates can directly protect you by offering gradual healing or building a wall to shield you or something like that. Now, it's not like the game doesn't function the way that it is. It does, but the chaos of the high player count is not conducive to strategic play, particularly when every class more or less has the same destructive capabilities. It starts to create a very real optimal strategy of having as many medics and engineers as you can, so that you can infinitely revive teammates and build crap tons of turrets, while also maybe having a single soldier to keep everyone's ammo topped off. Seriously, having 4 base medics means you have up to 16 revives on hand at any one time. Then you simply swap one of these people out whenever you need an operative to hack something. But that leads to the worst type of gameplay loop that you see in the less balanced Call of Duty games and modes, where everyone is just rushing around, chucking explosives, dying, and respawning to repeat. The tactical nature of Brink's design is lost with such a high player count, and all because it would have been needlessly criticized had they done something like cap matches at 5v5 or 6v6 at max. Heck, I even tried it out, and played a few matches at 5v5, and it worked significantly better. Strategic play was much more mandatory because you only had enough teammates to include 1 player from each class and a single extra. And if you used effective strategies against your opponents, the cost of mistakes for them was more severe. They couldn't simply revive 4 dudes and continue chucking grenades or whatever. Brink is a little janky by the standards of today's shooters, and it has a huge identity problem thanks to the forces at the time trying to push it in the wrong direction. but it is worth something. You can see the beginnings of our modern hero shooters in it, just like you can in Team Fortress 2. It works if you limit the player count in matches. It's just a shame that it couldn't realize the vision that it should have realized back when it first released. But what do you guys think? Have you played Brink? Do you think it works with a full 16 player count? It apparently went free to play on Steam back in August of this year, so maybe it's worth getting 9 of your friends together, if you can actually manage that, and trying to play a few matches. Tell me what you think in the comments below, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you're interested in another one, here's the last one that I uploaded. You can also follow me on Twitter or subscribe by hitting the subscribe button.